The billionaire CEO yelled at a maid's daughter for touching his car, but then she saved his empire. "Step away from that car." The shout thundered through the billionaire's garage, freezing the air. Nelson Lynch, a powerful CEO in a navy suit and polished Italian shoes, stormed toward a tiny girl standing beside his silver Aston Martin. His gray eyes were cold with fury as he spotted a purple crayon in her hand. The 6-year-old froze, her yellow dress glowing under the bright lights, her brown eyes filling with tears. The crayon slipped and hit the floor. "Do you know what that car costs?" Nelson barked. "More than your mother makes in 5 years." Her mother rushed in, a tired maid with caramel-toned skin and a calm but firm voice. "Please, sir. She didn't mean any harm." But Nelson turned away, too angry to listen. The child ran off crying, and her mother followed with quiet dignity. Hours later, the car gleamed spotless again. Nelson thought the matter was over. 3 months later, when his billion-dollar company was seconds from collapse, the same little girl he'd humiliated became his only hope. Could a 6-year-old really save a billionaire's empire? Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Tomorrow's story will touch your heart. Nelson Lynch woke every day at 5 a.m., his routine as precise as the ticking clock on his nightstand. By 6, he was already in the gym of his glass-walled penthouse, running on the treadmill while news screens streamed financial updates. He liked control over his body, his time, and above all, his company, Lynch Global Industries. His office, a high-rise corner suite overlooking the city skyline, reflected that control. Polished floors, dark wood furniture, and a wall of framed awards reminded everyone who entered that he was a man who built everything from nothing. At 43, he was a self-made billionaire, proud of his discipline and sharp instincts. To him, perfection wasn't an ideal. It was the only acceptable standard. His employees respected him, but they also feared him. Nelson expected results without excuses. Meetings were efficient, voices were calm, and mistakes were rare because no one dared make them twice. He preferred it that way. Business was about logic, not emotion. Success came from structure, not sympathy. He spent most nights in his penthouse alone. The silence was something he didn't mind. There were no family dinners, no birthdays, no interruptions, only the quiet hum of success. Relationships, in his view, were distractions. People slowed progress. He had no time for them. Linda Perez, his housekeeper, had worked for him for 3 years. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, cleaning the office floors, organizing the bookshelves, and wiping the glass walls until they shone. Nelson rarely noticed her. She moved quietly, never interrupting him as he dictated emails or took calls. When she did speak, it was usually a polite "good morning, sir," followed by a nod before she went about her duties. She took pride in her work. Despite the low pay and long hours, Linda believed in doing her job well. She was a single mother, raising her 6-year-old daughter, Catherine, with care and patience. Every paycheck went toward food, rent, and the old tablet Catherine used to learn. That tablet had been a gift from a neighbor's son who no longer needed it, but to Catherine, it was a treasure. Catherine was different from other children. She loved numbers and patterns, always asking her mother questions about how things worked. Linda often came home to find the child tracing shapes or arranging colored pencils into perfect sequences. Once, Catherine showed her a line of letters on the tablet screen that she'd copied from a computer manual. "It looks like a song," she'd said, smiling. Linda hadn't understood it, but she knew her daughter's mind worked in mysterious, wonderful ways. Sometimes, during her cleaning rounds, Linda would mention Catherine to Nelson. She'd talk about her daughter's fascination with numbers, her endless curiosity. Nelson would respond with polite disinterest, barely looking up from his laptop. "That's nice," he'd say, before redirecting the conversation back to business. 3 months had passed since the day Nelson yelled at Catherine for touching his car. The memory still hung silently between them. Linda never brought it up, and Nelson never apologized. The routine continued, his structured mornings, her quiet service. But something had shifted. Every now and then, when Nelson saw Linda carefully dusting his desk, he thought of the way she'd stood up to him that day, firm, but respectful. It bothered him, though he couldn't say why. Outside, his empire thrived. Lynch Global Industries was one of the world's leading technology firms, dealing in data security, smart infrastructure, and advanced AI. The company's slogan, "Precision in every system," mirrored his own philosophy. Every process was built to perfection, every employee trained to deliver results. Nelson's life was scheduled to the minute. Morning review calls at 7, executive briefings at 9, investor meetings in the afternoon, and final reports by evening. The same driver, the same meals, the same polished image in the mirror each night. In that carefully arranged world, there was no room for surprise. No space for error. Linda, on the other hand, lived in a very different rhythm. After long hours cleaning Nelson's home and office, she returned to a small apartment where Catherine waited for her. Their evenings were filled with laughter, homework, and simple dinners. Catherine often showed her mother patterns she discovered online, shapes, numbers, and codes she could recognize instantly. "Look, Mama," she'd say, tapping the screen. "It talks to me. The numbers have a rhythm." Linda didn't understand the full meaning, but she encouraged her. "Keep learning, my love. You have a special gift." That same gift would soon bridge two worlds, one built on power and control, the other on patience and hope. But for now, neither of them knew how close their paths were to crossing again. Each morning, when Linda cleaned Nelson's office, she'd glance at the computer monitors filled with streams of data and lines of code. She didn't dare touch anything, but she noticed how Catherine's eyes would have lit up if she could see it. The screens looked like the puzzles her daughter loved. Nelson remained focused on his empire, unaware that his world was only months away from collapse. In his pursuit of perfection, he had overlooked one simple truth, that sometimes, the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected place. The day that lesson arrived would change everything he believed about success, control, and even himself. The morning began like any other. Nelson Lynch arrived at Lynch Global's headquarters in his usual calm stride, coffee in hand, nodding briefly at the security guards as he entered the gleaming glass tower that bore his company's name. But as soon as he stepped into the lobby, he knew something was wrong. The hum of routine efficiency was gone. Employees stood in small, tense groups. Phones buzzed non-stop. The receptionists' faces were pale. By the time Nelson reached the top floor, the air felt heavier, charged with panic. His assistant hurried toward him, voice trembling. "Sir, IT needs you in the control room right now. It's urgent." He walked in to find screens flashing red warnings across the wall monitors. Words like "access denied" and "encrypted files" blinked in sharp digital letters. Every computer seemed frozen mid-task. His head of security, James, stood near the center table, his usual composure gone. "What's going on?" Nelson demanded. James hesitated. "We've been compromised, sir. The main servers are locked. Every system, finance, clients, algorithms, intellectual property, all encrypted." Nelson frowned, his voice tight. "How long has this been happening?" 3 days, James said quietly. "We just didn't realize the full extent until now. Whoever did this is using advanced ransomware. They've left a message." He handed Nelson a printed page. Across it, bold text read, "Your system is ours." Pay $50 million in crypto within 48 hours, or everything, your data, your algorithms, your secrets, goes public. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Nelson's jaw clenched as he read it again. $50 million. 2 days. His company's entire value, reputation, and future, all in the hands of faceless criminals. Have you identified who's behind it? He asked, his tone sharp. James shook his head. They've masked everything. No digital footprint, no traceable IP. It's sophisticated, military-grade encryption. Our team's never seen anything like it. Then get someone who has, Nelson snapped. Call every consultant we've used. I want this fixed today. An hour later, the boardroom filled with executives, investors, and department heads. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Charts of locked systems flashed on the presentation screen. Nelson stood at the head of the table, every eye on him. We're under attack, he said plainly. But we'll get through this. Lynch Global has the best minds in the industry. One shareholder leaned forward. The message demands payment. Shouldn't we consider it? Nelson's glare silenced the room. We don't negotiate with criminals. Ever. But if they destroy the data, another voice argued. We're talking about losing billions in intellectual property. I said no, Nelson cut in. His voice was firm, but the lines around his eyes betrayed the pressure he felt. Behind him, the head of IT clicked through failed recovery attempts. We've tried everything, decryption tools, restoring backups, isolating the infected servers. But even our backups are encrypted. Whoever did this, they anticipated every move. How much time left? Nelson asked. 36 hours before the deadline. The words hit him like a blow. 36 hours to save what had taken him 2 decades to build. As the meeting continued, the tension grew thicker. Experts explained that the ransomware used layers of shifting code, changing encryption keys every few seconds. It was like chasing a shadow. Every attempt to break through only triggered more lockdowns. James leaned close, speaking quietly. Sir, I think it's time to bring in the authorities. If we alert the FBI's cyber division, they might be able to track the source. Nelson shook his head immediately. No. We keep this in-house. If this goes public, we lose everything. Clients, investors, reputation. You know what headlines like this can do. But the press will find out eventually, James warned. If not from us, then from someone inside. I'll handle it, Nelson said coldly. Hours turned into a blur of failed attempts. Teams worked around the clock, their faces drawn and eyes tired. Each new idea ended the same way, access denied. Even external experts, some of the best in the field, left scratching their heads. By midnight, Nelson sat alone in his office. The skyline outside glowed against the dark, but he barely saw it. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't control: fear. Not the kind that came from competition or deadlines, but the kind that came from watching everything he'd built crumble inch by inch. The financial team sent updates every hour, stock prices dropping, clients calling in panic, rumors spreading. Nelson ignored the growing list of missed calls. He thought of his company's motto: precision in every system. Now, his perfect system was collapsing. The thought made his chest tighten. James entered quietly. Sir, it's getting worse. They're threatening to release fragments of the stolen data online to prove they have everything. Do it, Nelson said softly, almost to himself. Shut everything down if you have to. We can't let them win. But if we go offline completely. I said do it. Nelson's voice cracked, surprising even him. He pressed his hands to his temples. Just buy us time. James hesitated before leaving the room. Nelson sat there for a long time, staring at the dark monitor in front of him. His reflection stared back, a man who'd built an empire out of discipline and control, now powerless before a screen. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered the truth he refused to admit. This time, he couldn't fix it alone. Outside, the city lights flickered below his office, unaware that a global empire was hanging by a thread. 36 hours left, and the clock was still ticking. Nelson sat alone in his office, the glow from his computer screen dimming the longer he stared at it. Lines of code scrolled endlessly, mocking him with every failed attempt to regain control. Empty coffee cups and discarded reports littered the desk. The once confident billionaire now looked like a man cornered by his own empire. Outside, the night stretched deep and silent. Everyone had gone home except for the cleaning crew. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second a cruel reminder, less than 20 hours left. A soft knock broke the silence. The door opened slightly, and Linda Perez stepped in, carrying a cleaning cart. She froze when she saw him slumped at his desk, his tie loosened, eyes hollow. "I can come back later, sir," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Do whatever you need, Linda." She hesitated, then began wiping the window ledge. After a moment, she glanced toward him again. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you look tired." He gave a dry laugh. "That's one way to put it. My company's dying, and no one knows how to save it." Linda set her cloth down. "Catherine mentioned something strange yesterday. She said she saw your computer screen while I was dusting in here." Nelson finally looked up. "Your daughter was in my office." "She didn't touch anything," Linda said quickly. "She just saw the screen. She said it looked like a puzzle. She took a picture of it because she thought it was pretty." His brows furrowed. "A picture? Of my screen?" Linda nodded and took out her old phone, scrolling through the gallery before showing him an image, a screenshot of the ransomware's encryption pattern. Rows of numbers, letters, and strange symbols filled the frame. For a second, Nelson's irritation flared. Then it faded into something else. Curiosity. He leaned closer. "This is part of the encrypted code. She noticed this." Linda nodded carefully. She said the symbols reminded her of one of her games. "What game?" "She makes her own," Linda said simply. "Catherine's. Well, she's different. She started reading when she was 2. Solves math problems faster than I can read them. I didn't have money for special testing, but I know she sees things other people miss." Nelson leaned back, skeptical. "Linda, this code stumped top cybersecurity consultants. Your daughter is 6. "I know," she said softly, folding her hands. "But she learns fast. Sometimes too fast. Maybe she can see something the others can't. It's worth trying, isn't it?" He stared at her for a long moment, torn between disbelief and the gnawing desperation eating at him. What did he have left to lose? "Where is she now?" "At home," Linda replied. "Asleep, I hope." Nelson rubbed his temples, thinking. "Call her. Bring her in. Now." Linda blinked. "Sir, it's almost midnight." "I said bring her," Nelson repeated, his tone sharp but not angry, more like a plea hiding behind command. Within the hour, Linda returned holding Catherine's hand. The little girl wore a pink hoodie and clutched her small tablet. Her eyes widened at the sight of the massive office filled with glowing screens. James entered just as they arrived, confusion written all over his face. "Sir, what's going on? Who's this?" "This," Nelson said, pointing toward the girl, is our new consultant. James blinked. You're joking. I'm not. She saw something in the encryption pattern I need to understand. Just let her look. Catherine stepped closer to the desk. That's the same picture, Mommy, she whispered. But it's moving now. Nelson watched as she climbed onto the chair, legs swinging, her small hand steady on the tablet. What do you mean, moving? He asked. The letters change every second, she said. Like a dance. But it's not random. It repeats after a while. Look. She tapped the screen of her tablet and began tracing a shape with her finger, a looping figure that connected certain repeating letters. The IT team crowded around, their skepticism fading as they noticed the rhythm in the encryption. James frowned. We've run millions of scans, and none of them picked that up. Because you looked at it like a lock, Catherine said, not taking her eyes off the screen. It's more like a mirror. If you flip it upside down and count backward, the pattern opens a gap. Nelson's eyes widened. Reverse sequence decoding, he muttered. We dismissed that on day one. But if she's right, James interrupted, we can try remapping the base algorithm to catch the repeating loop. Within minutes, the IT team was back at their stations, guided by Catherine's observations. The girl leaned over Nelson's shoulder as he entered commands. Not that line, she said quietly. The one below it. It matches the picture. Nelson hesitated, then followed her lead. The screen flickered. Lines of code began unlocking one by one. Wait, it's working, one of the technicians whispered. It's actually working. A ripple of disbelief and relief swept through the room. Nelson stared at the screen as the encrypted file started to decrypt, layer by layer. How did you see that? He asked Catherine. She shrugged, a shy smile forming. It just looked wrong before. Like the puzzle was upside down. When the final lock disappeared, applause filled the office. The system was free. Years of work, restored by a child's intuition. James turned to Nelson, shaking his head in amazement. I don't believe it. We were finished, and she just... Nelson knelt to Catherine's height. You saved my company, he said quietly. Do you know what that means? She nodded solemnly. Mom said everyone's been scared. Now they don't have to be. Linda stood nearby, eyes shining. For once, Nelson didn't see her as the maid. He saw her as a mother, standing proud beside her extraordinary child. When morning came, the news had already spread through the building. The company's systems were restored. Stock prices began to rise again. But for Nelson, something deeper had shifted. He looked out at the sunrise through the glass walls of his office, Catherine's laughter echoing down the hall. The empire he'd built with numbers and strategy had been saved by the one person he least expected, the child he once yelled at for touching his car. And as he watched Linda guiding her daughter out of the room, Nelson Lynch realized that not all wealth is measured in billions. Sometimes, it's measured in brilliance and grace. The boardroom had been turned into a war room. Screens covered the walls, each one displaying streams of code, red warnings, and countdown timers. The air felt tight with tension. IT experts filled the room, their faces pale from exhaustion. In the middle of all the chaos sat Catherine, a 6-year-old girl with her feet barely touching the ground. She looked small in the oversized leather chair, her pink hoodie sleeves covering her hands. For a moment, she said nothing, her big brown eyes darting between the glowing monitors. The experts exchanged doubtful looks, whispering among themselves. Nelson stood beside her, his suit wrinkled from the long night, but his expression steady. Let her try, he said quietly, silencing the murmurs. Catherine took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the largest screen. Her voice was small but clear. The code has a heartbeat. The room fell silent. One of the IT specialists frowned. A heartbeat. Yes, she said, pointing. It repeats every 17 seconds. Like, thump, thump, rest. Thump, thump, rest. They stared at the data stream. None of them had noticed it before. The repeating intervals she described matched perfectly. Nelson leaned forward. What does that mean? It means it's alive, she said softly. Not really alive, but built to move like something breathing. Someone wanted it to blend in so you'd miss the rhythm. The experts exchanged looks again, now more intrigued than skeptical. Catherine reached for her small tablet and began sketching with her finger. Numbers, arrows, and loops formed a pattern. These parts talk to each other, she explained. But some lines don't belong. They're pretending. One of the programmers, a tall man named Raj, leaned over her shoulder. You're saying the code has imposters? Yes, she said. Bad lines. They copy the good ones but with tiny mistakes. That's how they hide. Nelson's eyes stayed on her, his disbelief slowly giving way to admiration. The more she spoke, the more the room listened. The people who had once laughed now watched closely, jotting down her every word. Can you show us where the bad lines are? Nelson asked. Catherine nodded. I need a clean computer. No connections, no internet. Just numbers. They quickly rolled in a spare laptop. Catherine pulled her hair back, adjusted the chair, and began typing. Her fingers moved fast but deliberate. Within minutes, lines of new code appeared across the screen. What are you doing? Raj asked. Making a map, she replied. Bad people always leave a door. They want to come back later. I found 3 doors. The experts leaned closer. On the screen, 3 highlighted sections blinked in red. Those are back doors, Raj whispered. She found the re-entry points. We missed them. Nelson turned to him. They planned to get paid, unlock everything, and then come back for more, didn't they? Raj nodded grimly. Exactly. They could have wiped everything the moment we paid. Catherine didn't stop typing. I can use their doors against them, she said. If I send their own signal back through, it will close the doors and break their lock from inside. But I need time, 12 hours, maybe. The board members, who had gathered to watch, erupted in murmurs. One woman whispered, We're trusting a child to do this. Nelson raised a hand. She's our best chance. We've tried everything else. The chairman sighed. If it fails, then we lose everything, Nelson said. But we're already losing. The room fell quiet. Finally, the chairman nodded. Do it. Catherine smiled faintly and got back to work. Nelson stayed by her side, while Linda brought in sandwiches and hot cocoa. As the hours passed, the atmosphere shifted. The IT staff who had doubted her were now helping, taking her cues, following her logic. Catherine didn't bark orders, she explained, step by step, in words even the non-technical members could follow. Around midnight, Nelson sat beside her as she worked. The only sound was the clicking of her keyboard. He watched her face illuminated by the screen's glow, focused, calm, fearless. You're very brave, he said quietly. Catherine didn't look up. Mom says bravery means doing something even when you're scared. Are you scared? He smiled faintly. More than I've ever been. She stopped typing for a moment. Is that why you yelled at me about your car? Nelson froze. The question hung in the air. He exhaled slowly. I was wrong that day, he admitted. I thought things were more important than people. I thought control was everything. But I see now, It isn't. Catherine's small fingers returned to the keyboard. Mom says when people are scared, they forget to be kind. But they can remember again. He nodded, his voice low. She's right. Hours passed. The board members came and went. Some stayed to watch, their earlier doubts replaced with quiet respect. By morning, Catherine pressed the final key. The room held its breath. The monitors flickered once, twice, then the red warnings disappeared, replaced by clean, restored data. It's done, Catherine whispered. Raj stared at the screen, speechless. She reversed it, completely. The room erupted in applause. Some laughed, others wiped their eyes. Linda hugged her daughter tightly while Nelson stood still, taking it all in. He looked down at Catherine. You didn't just save a company, he said softly. You saved me too. She smiled sleepily. You're welcome, Mr. Nelson. Linda looked at him with quiet pride. I told you she sees things differently. As the first light of dawn touched the glass walls, Nelson knew the moment would stay with him forever. The empire he built with logic had been saved by a child's heart and a mother's faith. The night dragged into its final hours, the hum of computers filling the war room like quiet thunder. Empty coffee cups, snack wrappers, and half-drained bottles of water littered the long table. It had been 10 straight hours since Catherine started working, and though the adults around her were drained, she remained steady, focused, calm, and strangely energized. Lines of code continued to scroll across the screens. Catherine's fingers flew across the keyboard as she murmured softly to herself, her mind moving faster than anyone in the room could follow. Nelson stood behind her, hands clasped tightly, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and awe. Hour 10, James said quietly, glancing at the digital clock on the wall. We're running out of time. Catherine didn't look up. Not yet, she whispered. The first layer is almost open. The IT experts watched as strings of data shifted on the monitors. Suddenly, one of the red alert symbols turned green. Gasps filled the room. She did it, Raj said, his voice cracking. She cracked the first encryption layer. Catherine leaned back slightly, eyes still fixed on the screen. It wasn't locked, she said simply. It was scared. The room went silent for a moment, the adults exchanging uncertain looks. Nelson frowned slightly but didn't interrupt. Catherine continued, they made the code too nervous. When people overprotect something, it starts to break from the inside. Her quiet logic both puzzled and impressed everyone present. The IT team, once skeptical, now followed her lead without question. Grown men and women in suits were taking instructions from a 6-year-old girl. Outside, the crisis was becoming public. Reporters had gathered in front of Lynch Global headquarters, camera flashes lighting up the night sky. News anchors speculated about a cyber attack threatening one of the nation's largest private corporations. The company's stock price was in free fall, losing millions by the minute. In the boardroom-turned-command center, Nelson barely noticed the chaos outside. His focus remained on the little girl typing faster than anyone he had ever seen. Hour 11, James announced. We've lost another 5% of our market value. Catherine didn't react. Her concentration deepened. Second layer, she said softly. This one's louder. She tapped a few keys, then froze, her brows knitting together. They tried to hide their name, she murmured, but they left their reflection. Nelson stepped closer. What do you mean, reflection? Catherine pointed to a string of numbers on the screen. This part doesn't belong to the data. It's from their computer, metadata. I can trace it. Raj blinked in disbelief. She's pulling location data from the encryption header. Within minutes, Catherine's tablet displayed a map, coordinates blinking somewhere in Eastern Europe. James immediately grabbed his phone. We can get the FBI cyber unit on this right now. Nelson nodded, his voice firm. Do it. Use whatever she gives you. Catherine turned to him briefly, her face serious. They made it complicated to scare you, she said. But complicated things break easier than simple ones. Her words hit him harder than she knew. 4 years, he had built his empire on complexity, layers of control, structure, and rigid order. But in that moment, it became clear, his empire's greatest weakness was its lack of simplicity, of human connection. By hour 12, the room felt like the edge of a storm. The screens blinked in rapid sequences, data streams flowing faster and faster as Catherine ran her counter-algorithm. Nelson's heart pounded as he watched her, the room filled with the rhythmic clatter of keys. Raj whispered, "We're at full system scan. If this works, the encryption should collapse." Everyone waited. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, one by one, the red warnings began to vanish. A green wave spread across the monitors, servers reactivating, databases restoring, client information reappearing. "She's doing it," someone shouted. Catherine kept typing until the last alert turned green. Then, finally, she sat back, exhaled, and gave a small, tired smile. "It's done." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then cheers erupted across the room. People hugged, clapped, cried. James dropped into a chair, rubbing his face in disbelief. Raj shouted across the table, "She did what 3 consulting firms couldn't." Nelson didn't cheer. He just watched her quietly, overwhelmed by emotion. Catherine turned her head toward him. "It's fixed now. Your company's safe." His voice was low but steady. "How did you do it, Catherine? How did you know where to start?" She smiled faintly. "I just listened to what the numbers were trying to say." In that moment, Nelson realized something he'd never understood before. Success wasn't just about control or power. It was about seeing meaning where others saw noise, about listening instead of commanding. The data was restored. The hackers were traced. The company was saved. But for Nelson, the real restoration had just begun. The press conference hall was overflowing, reporters shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing, microphones raised high. The world wanted answers. How had a company on the brink of collapse managed to recover overnight? How did Lynch Global restore every system after being crippled by a ransomware attack that experts said was impossible to undo? Nelson stood at the podium, his reflection flickering on the giant monitors behind him. For the first time in years, he wasn't rehearsed, polished, or armored in pride. His suit fit as sharply as ever, but his expression had softened. The weight of what had happened, and who had made it possible, was written across his face. He began slowly, his voice steady but subdued. 3 days ago, Lynch Global faced total ruin. We were attacked, our systems locked, our future uncertain. My team and I exhausted every option, until help came from the most unexpected place. The crowd leaned in. Murmurs rippled through the press line. He paused, then said clearly, "The person responsible for saving Lynch Global isn't a cybersecurity expert. She isn't even an employee. She's a 6-year-old girl named Catherine, the daughter of one of our staff." The room erupted. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted over one another, trying to confirm they'd heard correctly. A child? 6 years old? The story was too unbelievable to process in a single breath. Nelson gestured toward the side of the stage, where Linda stood with Catherine. The little girl clutched her mother's hand tightly, blinking at the sea of flashing lights. Dressed in a simple yellow dress, her tablet held close to her chest, she looked like any other child, until you noticed the quiet focus in her eyes. Linda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. She leaned down and whispered something reassuring to Catherine before guiding her forward. The crowd softened instantly, applause spreading through the hall like a wave. Nelson looked at them, his voice carrying warmth and humility. Catherine saw what none of us could. Where we saw chaos, she saw patterns. She found a way through the encryption that was holding this company hostage. Without her, Lynch Global would be gone. The reporters' questions came fast. How did a 6-year-old manage to do what teams of experts couldn't? Is she some kind of prodigy? What's her background? Nelson raised his hand gently to quiet the room. Her mother, Linda, has worked for me as a cleaner for several months. Catherine is exceptional. But this isn't just about intelligence, it's about perspective. I almost missed the greatest asset I could have ever had because I judged a book by its cover. He glanced at Linda, his eyes filled with remorse. I once made a terrible mistake, he admitted. Months ago, I humiliated this woman and her daughter over something as trivial as a car. My arrogance blinded me. Today, I stand here because that same little girl I once dismissed chose to help me instead of hate me. Gasps filled the hall. A few journalists exchanged glances. Others lowered their cameras in silent disbelief. Nelson continued, his voice breaking slightly under the emotion he no longer hid. To Catherine, and to Linda, I owe everything. I was wrong. Deeply wrong. And I'm sorry. The moment lingered in the air, heavy and pure. Linda's eyes glistened, her grip on Catherine's hand tightening. She wasn't used to hearing words like that from men like him, not in private, and certainly not in public. Then, the applause began, soft at first, then building until the entire hall echoed with it. Even the most skeptical reporters couldn't deny the authenticity of what they'd just witnessed. By evening, the story had swept across the internet. 6-year-old girl saves billion-dollar company headlined nearly every news outlet. Clips of Nelson's apology were trending on every major platform. Catherine's photo, half-shy smile, half-determined gaze, became a global symbol of unexpected brilliance. Social media lit up with admiration and disbelief. Memes, documentaries in progress, hashtags like #CatherineTheCoder and #GraceOverPride flooded timelines. Commentators called it a modern-day miracle. Tech forums debated her methods, while parents across the world showed their children what was possible when curiosity met courage. But for Linda, the fame brought more fear than joy. Calls poured in, schools offering scholarships, companies requesting interviews, research institutions wanting to evaluate Catherine's talent. The attention was overwhelming. She spent nights awake, scrolling through offers she didn't understand, trying to protect her daughter's innocence in a world suddenly obsessed with her. Nelson noticed. Later that week, he requested a private meeting in his office, just the three of them. No cameras, no reporters. When Linda and Catherine entered, the room was quiet. The screens that once displayed graphs and financial data now showed a simple background, a photo of Catherine sitting at the computer during the crisis, her small fingers resting on the keyboard. Nelson rose from his chair. I wanted to thank you both properly, he began. Not as an executive or a businessman, but as a man who learned a hard lesson. Linda nodded cautiously. You already did that in front of the world. Maybe, he said softly, but I wanted you to hear it without the noise. What you both did, it didn't just save a company. It changed me. He turned to Catherine, lowering himself to her eye level. You saw what no one else could. You reminded me that value doesn't come from titles or wealth, it comes from what we choose to give. Catherine smiled shyly. I just followed the numbers. They were talking to me. Linda laughed gently, brushing her daughter's hair back. She's been saying things like that since she was little. Nelson smiled, genuine and unguarded. Well, from now on, I'm going to make sure she has every tool, every opportunity to let those numbers keep talking. Linda's expression softened, gratitude mixing with disbelief. I just don't want her turned into something she's not, she said. She's still a child. I promise you, Nelson replied, whatever happens next will happen on your terms. No contracts, no headlines, just support. For the first time, Linda believed him. As they left his office, Catherine turned back to wave, her tablet tucked under her arm. Nelson watched her go, realizing that in the span of days, this small girl had done more than save his company. She had restored something far greater. Faith, humanity, perspective. And for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel powerful. He felt grateful. Days turned into weeks, but the story of Lynch Global's miraculous recovery was far from over. For Nelson, it wasn't enough that the company was back online. Something inside him had shifted. He couldn't return to business as usual, not after seeing how arrogance had blinded him to the people who had saved him. He began quietly, without fanfare. One morning, Linda was summoned, not to scrub floors, but to meet with Nelson and his legal team. She entered his office nervously, unsure what to expect. Catherine trailed behind, her small backpack bouncing with each step. Nelson stood to greet them, a gesture that startled Linda. He gestured for her to sit. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next, he began. You've given me more than I can ever repay. But I intend to try. He handed her a folder, its contents neatly arranged. Inside was an official document outlining a full scholarship fund for Catherine. Tuition, mentorship, access to specialized programs for gifted children around the world. This isn't charity, Nelson said. It's an investment in someone who's already proven she can change the world. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Just say yes, he replied softly. But he didn't stop there. A second folder followed. And this, he said, is your new position. Director of Household Operations. You'll oversee all domestic staff, manage logistics, and report directly to me. Full salary, benefits, and a title that reflects your worth. Linda blinked, speechless. Mr. Lynch, I don't think I'm qualified. You've been running this household efficiently for months, he said with a smile. You are already doing the job. I'm just giving it the respect it deserves. Catherine beamed at her mother. See, Mom? You're important too. Nelson chuckled. She's right. Word of these changes spread through the company like wildfire. Employees began noticing other shifts too, quiet but deliberate. The cafeteria staff found new break policies and upgraded facilities. Maintenance teams received pay raises. Executives were encouraged to mentor junior employees instead of simply managing them. In his next board meeting, Nelson announced sweeping internal reforms. We've built this empire by squeezing efficiency out of people, he said, pacing slowly. But people aren't resources. They're the reason this company exists. That ends now. Fair wages, balanced workloads, and recognition for every role. No exceptions. The boardroom went silent. Some executives exchanged uneasy glances. One cleared his throat. With respect, sir, this will cut into margins. Nelson met his gaze. Then let it. Because an empire built on undervaluing people is already bankrupt. It wasn't the kind of speech Lynch Global's board was used to hearing, but over the months that followed, it became clear he meant every word. Nelson began spending less time behind glass walls and more time on the office floors. He learned employees' names, asked about their families, and remembered their answers. People who once avoided him began greeting him with genuine warmth. For the first time, the company felt human. Linda noticed the difference when she brought Catherine to visit one afternoon. The little girl roamed the building freely, peeking into conference rooms and watching presentations. Engineers smiled when she asked questions, genuinely impressed by her curiosity. Nelson joined her, amused. "You like numbers, but do you know what they mean to people?" he asked. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "They tell stories. You just have to listen." He grinned. "That's exactly what business should do too." Those visits became regular. Catherine sat in on meetings, sketching while Nelson explained basic principles of leadership, ethics, and responsibility. She absorbed everything, not just how systems worked, but how people responded to kindness, fairness, and respect. One afternoon, as they reviewed a presentation about employee satisfaction, Nelson turned to her. "You changed how I see things. You saved more than my company, Catherine. You reminded me why I built it in the first place." Catherine tilted her head. "You built it to make money." He laughed. "That's what I told myself. But no. I built it because I wanted to create something that mattered. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Linda, standing nearby, smiled faintly. It was the first time she'd seen him speak without the armor of pride. He looked lighter, real. As weeks became months, the results of Nelson's changes began to show. Employee satisfaction soared. Productivity improved. The company's reputation, once tarnished by greed and arrogance, was restored. Publications that once criticized his leadership now hailed it as revolutionary. When a leading business magazine interviewed him, they expected to hear strategies and profit models. Instead, they got something different. Nelson looked straight into the camera and said, "True wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give back." The quote spread faster than any marketing campaign could. It became the company's new motto, engraved in the lobby of Lynch Global's headquarters. But behind all the success, Nelson's transformation wasn't just corporate. It was deeply personal. His weekly meetings with Linda about Catherine's progress became moments of reflection. They spoke not only about school programs and scholarships but about values, kindness, resilience, and how to nurture gift without losing the child within it. Linda remained cautious, never forgetting where they started, but her walls slowly lowered. She began to see Nelson not as the man who had once humiliated her, but as someone genuinely changed. Catherine's innocent warmth had softened him, but it was his consistent humility that earned her trust. One evening, as they all walked through the garden after a company event, Nelson said quietly, "You know, Catherine taught me something no executive ever could." Linda glanced at him. "What's that?" He smiled. "To see patterns in people, not just in profits." Linda looked at her daughter, who was running ahead, chasing the evening light. "She has that effect," she said softly. For Nelson, that single moment said everything. His life, once driven by control and perfection, now felt guided by connection. The empire he'd built finally had a soul. 6 months later, the once quiet Lynch estate was alive with music and laughter. Balloons in soft pastels floated along the hedges, and children ran across the trimmed lawns. The occasion, Catherine's 7th birthday, had become more than a celebration of age. It was a symbol of everything that had changed. The garage, once a place of anger and humiliation, had been transformed into a gallery of joy. Colorful ribbons hung from the ceiling. The walls were lined with Catherine's artwork, sketches of birds, geometric patterns, and bright digital prints she'd created using her new computer. In the center of the room stood a sculpture, a silver bird in flight, its wings spread wide beside the Aston Martin. At its base, a plaque read, "In memory of the day I learned to truly see." Linda stood nearby, wiping a quiet tear as guests admired the display. Employees from Lynch Global mingled with Catherine's new school friends and teachers. There was laughter, music, and warmth, a far cry from the cold atmosphere that had once defined this home. Nelson moved through the crowd with a smile that seemed to come from a different man entirely. Gone was the rigid posture and clipped tone. He laughed easily, greeted staff by name, and carried no trace of the distant CEO he once was. When he caught Linda's eye across the room, he gave her a small nod of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of all they'd endured. When it was time for gifts, Nelson called for everyone's attention. "Catherine," he said gently, motioning her forward. She approached, curious and shy as ever, her yellow dress bouncing with each step. "This," he said, revealing a wrapped box nearly as tall as she was, "is from me. But it's not just a gift, it's a promise." Inside was a complete setup, an advanced computer system, programming software, and a 3D printer. But beside it lay something else: paints, brushes, sketchbooks, and a small easel. Catherine's eyes widened. "You remembered both." Nelson smiled. "Of course. You don't have to choose between numbers and colors. They both live inside you." Linda watched as her daughter hugged Nelson without hesitation. He knelt down, returning the hug, the emotion clear in his eyes. For the first time, there was no distance between them. Later, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled the garden, Nelson stood before the guests to speak. His voice carried not the authority of a CEO, but the sincerity of a man transformed. "6 months ago," he began, "I thought success was measured in profits and possessions. I thought power came from control. But a little girl showed me that I was wrong." He glanced at Catherine, who smiled shyly at the attention. "She reminded me that leadership isn't about how high you stand, it's about how well you listen. That grace can come from the most unexpected places, and that every person, no matter where they come from, deserves to be seen." The crowd was silent, moved by his words. "I want this day to remind us all," he continued, "that second chances aren't given to us by luck, they're earned through humility and kindness. Catherine, thank you for teaching me that." When the applause faded, Catherine tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Nelson." He crouched beside her. "Yes, sweetheart." Her voice was soft but clear. "Are we friends now?" Nelson's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head slowly, smiling. "No, Catherine. We're family." Linda looked on, her heart full. For months, she had guarded herself, unsure if his change would last. But now, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she knew the prideful man she once worked for was gone. In his place stood someone who finally understood compassion. As the evening settled and guests began to leave, Catherine wandered back toward the Aston Martin. She stopped beside it, tracing her fingers along the cool metal. Nelson joined her quietly. "You know," he said softly, "this car used to mean everything to me. It was my pride, my trophy." Catherine tilted her head. "What does it mean now?" He smiled. "It's just a car. But it's also where I met the person who changed my life." He reached behind him, pulling out a small box of washable markers. "Want to draw something?" Catherine gasped. "On the car." "On the car," he said with a nod. Her laughter filled the room as she began to draw. Bright birds, swirling numbers, patterns of light and movement. Nelson joined her, hesitant at first, then fully immersed, adding his own clumsy shapes beside hers. Soon, the silver surface was alive with color and imagination. Linda watched from the doorway, laughing through tears. For the first time, the garage wasn't a place of division. It was a canvas of forgiveness. Nelson looked at the car, covered in Catherine's art, and saw not imperfection but beauty. His reflection shimmered among the colors, not cold steel, but warmth, laughter, and humanity. When Catherine paused, holding up a blue marker, Nelson offered his hand. Together, they drew the final image, a bird soaring upward, wings stretched across the hood. He looked at her and whispered, "You gave me back more than my company, Catherine. You gave me back myself." As music drifted from the garden and the last light of day caught the sculpture outside, the camera panned across the colorful car, the laughing child, the tearful mother, and the smiling man who had finally learned to see. The story closes not with wealth or power, but with understanding, the kind that transforms hearts more deeply than any success ever could. Because brilliance doesn't come from status. It comes from empathy. Because true leadership isn't about being obeyed. It's about choosing to care. And sometimes, the greatest miracles begin with the people we least expect. Thank you for watching this incredible journey. Nelson, Linda, and little Catherine showed us that life can change in the most unexpected ways, when we choose grace over pride. What did this story teach you about seeing potential in unexpected places? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one of our powerful stories. Tomorrow, we're bringing you another heart-touching tale that will remind you how compassion can change everything. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that everyone has value, no matter where they come from. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us continue creating stories that inspire hope, kindness, and transformation. Until next time, remember, everyone you meet has something to teach you, if you're willing to listen.